The pandemic has caused massive disruption to the global economy and to businesses worldwide. But how lasting will its effect be? A survey of more than 3,000 global executives found that 37% think the pandemic has permanently altered their emphasis on health and safety.
A third of those surveyed by AlixPartners say it has changed their remote working practices for good.
But perhaps surprisingly, COVID-19 was not the main concern among businesses. Other forces, including artificial intelligence and robotics, data privacy and security, and new and evolving competition, were seen as more disruptive in the long term. Simon Freakley is the CEO of global management consultancy firm AlixPartners. I asked him what keeps executives up at night.
Even before we'd heard of COVID-19, many industries were being fundamentally disrupted. And even though COVID-19 has been the mother of all disruptions, it's still disruption that's keeping executives awake at night, but not necessarily COVID.
You say this affects many industries, but does it impact in a different way, sector to sector or region to region?
Well, I think some of the disruptions are universal. Take technology, for instance, the way in which artificial intelligence, business machine learning is really reimagining so many industries and businesses. But within technology, think about connectivity, smartphones, 3 billion of them in the world. On average, a smartphone user spends 3 hours a day on smartphones. They curate their own world, whether it's news, whether it's consumer goods, whether it's services. And so every industry is being touched by this, some more profoundly than others, but every industry is being touched by disruption.
And people, our demands and expectations play a big part in this, don't they?
Well, it's so interesting, you know, because of this sort of curation of one's own world through an online life, you know, we look at products through the lens of our values. Geography becomes less important. It's not just a matter of which store is nearby to go and pick the product up from. Product can be delivered from pretty much anywhere, sometimes overnight. And so people are curating their own environment for product and news, irrespective of geography. And so this connectivity within technology has become an accelerant of disruption, not just a disruption itself. And this trend is not stopping anytime soon.
You talk about these disruptive forces, but many of them were around pre-pandemic. What has really changed?
Well, I think a couple of things have changed, honestly. I think, firstly, the pace at which disruption is happening has increased. And while we were in a rolling sea before, we're now in a choppy sea because so many disruptions are happening all at the same time. You know, it used to be, Juliet, that we'd all watch the economic cycles and wonder, are we still going to go through growth? Is there going to be a recession? When will growth top out? What we've now found is that disruption is the new economic driver, and these economic cycles are secondary. The choppiness of all of these disruptions, accelerating in pace, are what are driving companies to have to be agile, to have to move quickly in terms of new business models, to let go some of the business models that did work pre-disruption, the integrated value chains, for instance, and really think about how to compete in an environment that's changing quickly, but also an environment which is promoting lots of new competitors on the back of the opportunities that these disruptions are affording.
You talk about competition, you talk about opportunities. Let's talk about risk, because we hear about black swans and grey rhinos, the rare and unpredictable events versus the great big obvious ones we don't pay enough attention to. Was COVID-19 running right at us, and what might be just over the horizon?
Well, it seems that the only people that really thought seriously about COVID-19 were Bill Gates and the trustees of Wimbledon tennis competition. The trustees of Wimbledon took out a pandemic insurance a couple of years before we'd heard of COVID-19. But of course, the vast majority of people were not baking a pandemic into their business plans. Their risk maps, looking at all of the likely risks to affect their businesses, considered all sorts of things like, for instance, cyber risk, which remains the #1 worry for executives around the world. But people hadn't considered the pandemic. But what COVID-19 has taught us all is that we don't have perfect knowledge, that things will be a surprise, and that we have to remain agile in the face of change. And one of the ways that this plays out so powerfully is the responsibility of leaders to give clear vision as to where the business can go, but to remain flexible in terms of the strategies to get the business where they need to go. So not being a hostage of previous strategies, making sure there is a clear vision of where the company needs to go.
But you're talking to and advising businesses around the clock. So who has that toolkit? Who have those strategies to cope with disruption?
I'll give you a quick example of that. Arne Sorensen, who sadly recently passed away, the chief executive of Marriott Group, saw his business, 435,000 employees worldwide, come to a grinding halt in COVID. Every single Marriott outlet was shut, but they took very quick action to ensure they contained the cost of that, furloughed employees with help from government and federal programs, looked at how they could use their hotels and facilities for other purposes. And just recently you will have seen that Marriott has announced that they're back in profit, even before we're out of the pandemic. So strong, deliberate, clear leadership is at a real premium.